The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the most beautiful place in the known universe. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that showed the stars themselves, and seats carved from rare minerals held representatives from 47 different species. Some had scales that glowed with inner light. Others floated in liquid-filled chambers. A few existed as clouds of thinking gas contained in magnetic fields. Admiral Grace Holloway walked through this hall with her back straight and her gray uniform pressed and clean. She was 63 years old, and she had spent 40 of those years serving humanity among the stars. Her hair had turned white from stress and loss, but her eyes remained sharp and clear. Behind her walked Captain Daniel Reyes, a younger officer who carried the weight of hope on his shoulders. He had grown up hearing stories about this day, the day when humanity would finally be recognized as equals. For 300 years, humans had been the workers of the galaxy. When a plague struck a distant world, human doctors flew through dangerous space to bring medicine. When raiders attacked peaceful colonies, human soldiers died defending people they had never met. When bridges needed building, and cities needed planning, and farms needed planting, humans were there with tools in their hands and sweat on their faces. They asked for nothing in return except respect. And respect was the one thing the council refused to give. Grace reached the speaking platform at the center of the hall. Above her, the High Speaker of the Valori looked down with eyes that held no warmth. The Valori were the oldest species in the galaxy. Their civilization had existed for 12,000 years, and they never let anyone forget it. "The representative from Earth may speak," the High Speaker announced. His voice was like wind through hollow tubes. Grace cleared her throat. She had practiced this speech 100 times, but now the words felt heavy on her tongue. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," she began. "Humanity comes before you today with a simple request. For 3 centuries, we have served this council with loyalty and dedication. Our soldiers have died on battlefields across 1,000 worlds. Our scientists have shared their discoveries freely. Our workers have built the infrastructure that keeps trade flowing between your planets." She paused and looked around the chamber. Most of the representatives were not even paying attention. The Koloth ambassador was reviewing trade reports. The Tesseron delegation was engaged in quiet conversation among themselves. Only a few species bothered to look at the human speaking. "We ask only for recognition of our contributions," Grace continued. "A permanent seat on the council. Voting rights on matters of galactic security. The same respect that is given to any other member species." The silence that followed was not thoughtful. It was dismissive. The Valori High Speaker made a sound that the translators turned into laughter, though it held no joy. "The humans are useful," he said. "This is known. They work hard and they die bravely. But they are children in the eyes of the galaxy. Their civilization is barely 3,000 years old. The Valori waited 9,000 years after reaching the stars before we were granted our seat. The Koloth waited 6,000. Even the young Tesserans waited 800 years." He leaned forward, and his translucent skin showed the organs pulsing beneath. "Humanity may wait their turn. Perhaps in another 5,000 years, this request can be considered again." Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. It was not anger. She had expected this answer. What she felt was something deeper. It was the final death of Hope. She thought about her daughter, buried on a frozen moon called Varric 7. She had died defending a Valori colony from raiders. The Valori had not sent a single message of thanks. They had not even acknowledged that human soldiers had saved their people. She thought about the human engineers who had worked for decades building the communication network that connected the council worlds. Their names appeared nowhere in the official records. The Koloth took credit for the entire project. She thought about the human farmers who had prevented famine on Tessar 4, working without rest for 3 growing seasons until the crops were stable. The Tesserans had thanked them privately, but voted against humanity in every council meeting. 300 years of service. 300 years of sacrifice. And in the eyes of the galaxy, humans were still just useful tools. "I understand," Grace said quietly. She turned and walked away from the speaking platform. The council representatives were already moving on to other business before she reached the door. Her request had taken 4 minutes of their time. It would be forgotten within the hour. Daniel met her in the corridor outside. His face was pale, and she could see the anger building behind his eyes. "Admiral," he said. "What did they say?" "They said no, Daniel. They have always said no. They will always say no. So what do we do now? Do we keep trying? Do we find another way?" Grace looked back at the sealed doors of the council chamber. She could hear faint sounds of discussion from within. The representatives were already debating trade routes and resource allocation. Humanity's hopes and dreams meant nothing to them. "No," she said. "We do not keep trying. We have tried for 300 years, and nothing has changed. Nothing will ever change. Then what?" Grace started walking toward the transport dock. Her steps were slow but steady. "We go home," she said. "And we stay there." Daniel hurried to keep up with her. "What do you mean? We cannot just abandon everything we have built out here. We are not abandoning anything. We are taking ourselves back. Everything we have given to this galaxy, we gave freely. But a gift that is never appreciated is not a gift. It is a tribute. And humanity is done paying tribute to those who look down on us." They reached the transport dock where their shuttle waited. Grace paused at the entrance and looked up at the stars visible through the transparent ceiling. For 300 years, we believed that if we worked hard enough and sacrificed enough, they would finally see us as equals, she said. But they never will. To them, we will always be the young species, the primitive ones, the useful workers who should be grateful for any scraps of attention. She stepped onto the shuttle and took her seat. Let them see what the galaxy looks like without humanity's help. Let them understand what they have lost. And when they finally realize the truth, when they finally come asking for our return, she strapped herself in and closed her eyes. We will remind them that respect is not something you give when you have no other choice. It is something you give because you understand that everyone deserves it. The shuttle lifted off and carried them toward the distant light of Earth's sun. Behind them, the Galactic Council continued its business without a second thought for the humans who had walked away. They would think about it later. They would think about it very much indeed. The message traveled at the speed of light across 10,000 relay stations. It reached every human outpost, every military base, every hospital ship, every construction site, and every diplomatic mission in the galaxy. The words were simple and clear. All human personnel are hereby recalled to Earth and its protected territories. All treaties of mutual defense are suspended indefinitely. All humanitarian aid programs are terminated. Humanity wishes the Galactic Council well in its future endeavors. On the agricultural world of Tessara 4, Commander Patricia Lane stood in a field of golden grain and read the message 3 times. The sun was warm on her face, and the smell of growing things filled the air. She had spent 5 years on this planet, teaching the Tesserans how to grow crops that could survive their changing climate. The Tesserans were gentle beings. They had 6 limbs and soft fur that changed color with their emotions. They were peaceful and kind, and Patricia had grown to love them during her time here. But she also remembered the council vote 3 years ago. She remembered how the Tesseran delegation had voted against humanity's request for observer status on the Agricultural Committee. They had done it because the Valori told them to. They had not even apologized. Elder Moss Understone approached her with his fur rippling in shades of blue and gray. These colors meant worry and confusion. "Commander Lane," he said, "we have received strange reports. The human transport ships are leaving orbit. Your people are packing their equipment. What is happening?" Patricia folded the message and put it in her pocket. "We are going home," she said. "Going home? But you cannot leave. The growing season approaches. Without your agricultural advisors, we will not know how to manage the new irrigation systems. Our crops will fail." Patricia picked up a crate of medical supplies. It was heavy in her arms. "I'm sorry," she said, "but we were never officially here. That is what the council called us when they refused to count our contributions. We were just volunteers, unofficial helpers. And volunteers can leave whenever they choose. But we will starve." The words hit Patricia like a physical blow. She cared about these people. She had worked beside them, eaten with them, celebrated their festivals, and mourned their losses. The thought of them suffering made her stomach turn. But she also thought about the human doctors who had died treating a plague on the Valori homeworld. The council had never acknowledged their sacrifice. She thought about the human engineers who had built the Tesseron communication network. Their names had been erased from the project records. "Perhaps you should bring that concern to the council," she said quietly. "They are very experienced in governance. I am certain they will find a solution." She boarded the transport without looking back. If she looked back, she might not be able to leave. Across the galaxy, the same scene repeated itself 1,000 times over. On the border world of Kethis Prime, human soldiers dismantled their defense stations. The local population watched in growing panic as the Yasti warriors who had protected them for 200 years packed their weapons and marched toward waiting ships. "You cannot abandon us," the Kethis governor pleaded. "The Vrexian raiders will return. Without your soldiers, we have no defense." Sergeant Maria Santos handed over the access codes to the planetary shield system. "The codes are all here," she said. "Your own military can operate the defenses. We trained them ourselves, but they are not ready. They have never faced the Vrexians without human support." Maria thought about her brother, who had died fighting Vrexians on this very world. His body had never been recovered. The Kethis government had refused to help search for him because they considered human remains a low priority. "Then perhaps they should practice," she said. "Goodbye, Governor." On the medical station orbiting Velaris 3, Dr. Samuel Hayes supervised the transfer of patients to local care facilities. The Valori medical staff watched with expressions that their translators could not properly interpret. "This is abandonment," the chief Valori physician said. "These patients require specialized human treatment methods. Some will die without your care." Samuel removed his medical badge and placed it on the desk. "For 80 years, human doctors have served on this station," he said. "In all that time, not one of us has been allowed to publish our research under our own names. Not one of us has been credited for the treatments we developed. Every discovery we made became Valori property." He picked up his bag and walked toward the exit. "Perhaps now you will have to make your own discoveries." The withdrawals were orderly and professional. Humans did not destroy equipment or sabotage systems. They simply left everything behind and went home. They handed over documentation and training materials. They explained how things worked and where to find replacement parts, and then they were gone. Ambassador Lucas Grant was the last human to leave Nexus Prime. He was a small man with gray hair and a soft voice. And he had served as humanity's representative to the Council for 20 years. The council chamber was busy when he approached the speaking platform. Representatives from dozens of species were arguing about trade agreements and territorial disputes. None of them noticed the human walking toward the center of the room. "Excuse me," Lucas said. No one responded. "Excuse me," he said again. Louder this time. The Koloth ambassador glanced down at him with cold crystal eyes. "The human may speak briefly. We have important matters to discuss." Lucas nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his diplomatic credentials. The small metal badge had been his most prized possession for 2 decades. "Humanity formally withdraws from all council obligations," he announced. "We will maintain our own borders, but will no longer participate in collective defense. We will trade only with those who wish to trade with us directly. We ask nothing from the council, and we offer nothing in return." The chamber fell silent. For the first time in 300 years, the council representatives actually looked at a human with their full attention. "This is foolishness," the Koloth ambassador said. "You will return when you realize you need us." Lucas placed his diplomatic credentials on the speaking platform. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps you will discover that you needed us more than you knew." He turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind him, he could hear voices rising in confusion and anger. Representatives were demanding explanations, calling for emergency sessions, trying to understand what had just happened. But Lucas did not stop. He walked through the crystal corridors of Nexus Prime, past the beautiful fountains and the ancient artwork, past the monuments to galactic civilization and the statues of legendary leaders. None of those monuments included humans. None of those statues showed human faces. He reached the transport dock and boarded the last shuttle leaving for Earth. As the ship rose through the atmosphere, he looked down at the glittering city below. "Goodbye," he whispered. The shuttle turned toward the distant light of humanity's home sun. Behind it, the Galactic Council was finally beginning to realize that something important had changed. They just did not understand how important it was. Not yet. The first year after humanity's departure was quiet. In the halls of the Galactic Council, representatives made jokes about the sulking primitives who would come crawling back within a cycle. The Valori High Speaker dismissed the withdrawal as a temporary tantrum that would end when humans realized they could not survive without council support. But humans did not come back. The first sign of trouble came from the Tesseron agricultural worlds. The growing season had begun, and the new irrigation systems were failing. Without human engineers to maintain them, the complex machinery broke down piece by piece. Tesseron technicians studied the manuals but could not understand the designs. The manuals were written in a human engineering language that no one had bothered to translate. Crops withered in the fields. Harvests failed. Food prices began to rise across council space. Then the Vrexian raiders returned. The Vrexians were monsters from the outer darkness. They had scales like knives and eyes that glowed with hunger. They attacked without warning and took prisoners for their slave markets. For 200 years, human soldiers had held them back. Human tactics, human courage, and human sacrifice had kept the border world safe. Now the borders were empty. The Vrexians struck Tessara 4 first, as they always did. Their black ships dropped from the sky like falling stars, and their warriors poured into the villages with weapons. Blazing. Elder Moss Understone hid in a basement with his family as the screams echoed outside. He remembered Patricia Lane's quiet voice. He remembered her sad eyes as she walked away. "Perhaps you should bring that concern to the council." The distress call went out immediately. Tesseron communication officers broadcast their plea for help across every frequency. They begged for rescue. They pleaded for salvation. The council received the message within minutes. But the council did not respond within minutes. Instead, the representatives began to debate. The Valori argued that defending Tessara the Fourth was not their responsibility. The Coloth insisted that any rescue mission should be paid for by the Tesserans themselves. The other species argued about logistics and costs and political implications. For 72 hours, they debated while the Vrexians burned villages and captured prisoners. When the Valori peacekeeping force finally arrived, 11 million Tesserans had been taken as slaves. The raiders were already gone, their ships vanishing into the darkness between stars. Elder Moss Understone stood in the ashes of his village and wept. His fur was gray with grief, and his eyes held no hope. He remembered how quickly the humans used to respond to distress calls. He remembered their ships arriving within hours, not days. He remembered their soldiers charging into battle without asking about payment or political advantage. He had voted against them in the council. He had followed the Valori's orders without question. Now he understood the price of that vote. On the trade routes, chaos spread like wildfire. Human convoy escorts had been so reliable and so predictable that other species had stopped investing in their own merchant protection. Why pay for security when the humans provided it for free? Now cargo ships traveled alone, and the pirates feasted. Trade volume dropped by 30% in the first 6 months. By the end of the year, it had dropped by 60%. Goods that had once moved freely between worlds now sat in warehouses because no one dared transport them. The Coloth hegemony watched these developments with cold interest. They had always feared humanity's military strength. Human tactics were unpredictable and effective. Human soldiers fought with a fury that seemed impossible for such small beings. Without humans to oppose them, the Coloth grew bold. They began sending probes into Council territory. Small ships at first, testing the defenses. When no response came, they sent larger fleets. When those fleets were not challenged, they began taking systems. The Council Defense Fleet tried to respond, but their commanders had spent 200 years following human strategic advice. Without human tactical officers to guide them, they stumbled from one disaster to another. The Valori High Speaker sent message after message to Earth. Each one demanded that humanity return to their duties. Each one insisted that humans had an obligation to serve the Council. Each one was politely declined. Secretary Evelyn Morris, the head of Earth's diplomatic corps, wrote the same response every time. Humanity is not a member of the Galactic Council. We have no obligation to attend Council summons. If the Council wishes to communicate with humanity, they may send a formal diplomatic envoy through proper channels. The Council had never sent a diplomatic envoy to Earth. Earth had always come to them. Pride prevented them from changing this tradition. Surely you humans would realize their mistake. Surely they would come begging to be allowed back. Months passed. The humans did not come. On the border worlds, the old human defense networks went dark. Warning systems that had detected threats for generations fell silent as their operators went home. Navigation beacons that had guided ships safely through dangerous regions stopped their broadcasts. Ships began disappearing. Some hit asteroids that were no longer marked on the charts. Others flew into regions where pirates waited in ambush. A few simply vanished, never to be found again. The Valori discovered that their star charts had been maintained by human cartographers for 2 centuries. Every update, every correction, every new discovery had been recorded by human scientists working in the background. Now the maps were frozen in time, slowly becoming useless as the galaxy continued to change around them. 3 Valori merchant vessels were lost to uncharted asteroid fields before anyone realized the problem. On the medical stations, patients began dying of diseases that human doctors had once cured easily. The treatments existed, but no one understood how to apply them. The research was locked in databases that only humans could access. The galaxy was falling apart, one piece at a time, and somewhere in the darkness of space, the Coloth hegemony prepared for war. They had been patient for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike. The humans had always stopped them before. Now there were no humans to stand in their way. The High Speaker sat in his chamber on Nexus Prime and stared at the reports piling up on his desk. Food shortages, military defeats, trade collapse, infrastructure failure. For the first time in his long life, he began to understand how much humanity had truly given to the dear galaxy, and he began to fear what would happen now that they were gone. 2 years after humanity's withdrawal, the Galactic Council stood on the edge of complete collapse. The Rexian raiders had grown from scattered attacks into an organized invasion force. They had captured 47 agricultural worlds and reduced their populations to slavery. The food supply for half the galaxy was now in enemy hands. The Coloth hegemony had annexed 12 star systems in the past 6 months alone. Their crystal ships moved through Council space like they owned it, because increasingly they did. The Council Defense Fleet had lost battle after battle, their commanders unable to adapt to enemy tactics without human advisors. Trade had collapsed almost entirely. The few merchant ships still flying demanded prices 10 times higher than before, and even then, most cargo never reached its destination. Pirates controlled entire sectors of space, operating openly without fear of punishment. The Valori High Speaker Valorous sat in his private chamber and stared at the darkness outside his window. His translucent skin showed organs that pulsed with colors of stress and fear. He had ruled the Council for 300 years, and he had never faced a crisis like this one. His advisors had offered many solutions. They suggested building new defense fleets, training new soldiers, developing new technologies. But all of these things took time, and time was something they no longer had. There was only one solution that could save them quickly, and it required something the Valori had never done in 12,000 years of civilization. It required them to humble themselves before a younger species. Valorous summoned his personal ship and began the journey to Earth. The trip took 3 weeks. Human space was not connected to the Council's network of faster-than-light gates. The humans had never been given access to that technology. They had developed their own methods of travel, slower but completely independent. When Valorous arrived in Earth's solar system, he was met by a small escort of human ships. They were not impressive by Council standards. Their designs were simple and functional, but they moved with a precision and confidence that he found unsettling. The escort guided him to an orbital station above Earth. From there, he took a shuttle down to the surface. He had never visited Earth before. He had never wanted to. Why would anyone visit the homeworld of servants? Now he looked out the window as the shuttle descended through the atmosphere. He saw blue oceans and green continents. He saw cities that sparkled with lights and farms that stretched to the horizon. He saw a world that was beautiful and alive, and completely unconcerned with the crisis that was destroying the galaxy. The shuttle landed in a city called Geneva. Secretary Evelyn Morse met him at the landing pad with a small group of human officials. She was a tall woman with dark skin and gray hair cut short. Her clothes were simple and practical. She did not bow or show any sign of deference. "High Speaker Valorous," she said. "Welcome to Earth. We have prepared a conference room for our discussion." The conference room was not impressive. It was a modest space with wooden furniture and windows that looked out on a garden. There were no crystal pillars, no bioluminescent displays, no hovering platforms. Just humans sitting at a table, drinking a dark liquid from ceramic cups. Admiral Grace Holloway sat at the end of the table. She was older than Valorous remembered, her hair completely white now. But her eyes were the same, steady, patient, unafraid. Captain Daniel Reyes sat beside her. Ambassador Lucas Grant was there as well, though he no longer held any official position. Patricia Lane had traveled from the colony world where she now worked as a civilian farmer. Samuel Hayes had come from the hospital, where he now treated only human patients. They all looked at Valeris and waited. He prepared a speech. He had planned to remind them of their obligations, to point out the consequences of their actions, to make them understand that the galaxy needed them. But looking at their faces, he knew that approach would fail. These were not people who could be bullied or pressured. They had already proven that. "You must return," he said simply. "The council needs you." Secretary Morris took a sip from her cup. "The council made its position clear 2 years ago," she replied. "We are young, primitive. We have not earned our place. That was a mistake. We were wrong." The words hung in the air. Valeris had never spoken them before. In 12,000 years of Valori history, no High Speaker had ever admitted error to a younger species. "Yes," said Admiral Holloway. "You were wrong." Silence filled the room. Valeris felt exposed in a way he had never experienced. He was the leader of the oldest civilization in the galaxy, standing before a group of beings whose entire history was barely a heartbeat compared to his own, and they were making him wait. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Name your terms. Whatever you require, we will provide it." Ambassador Grant leaned forward in his chair. "We want nothing from the council, High Speaker. That is what you never understood. We did not help you because we wanted something in return. We helped because it was right. Because we believed in cooperation and mutual support. Because we thought we were building something together. Then why did you leave?" Secretary Morris set down her cup and folded her hands on the table. "Because you made it clear that we were not partners. We were servants. Useful tools to be deployed and discarded. We gave you our blood and our children and our dreams, and you gave us nothing but contempt." Patricia Lane spoke up from her seat by the wall. "I spent 5 years teaching the Tesserans how to grow food. I loved those people. And when I had to leave them, it broke my heart. But they voted against us every time. They followed orders without questioning whether those orders were right." Dr. Samuel Hayes nodded. "I developed treatments that saved millions of lives. The Valari took credit for all of them. My name appears nowhere in your medical records." Admiral Holloway raised her hand slightly, and the others fell silent. "We realized that no matter how much we gave, we would never be equals in your eyes," she said. "We realized that our sacrifice meant nothing to you. So we stopped sacrificing." Valeris felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt shame. "We are willing to offer full membership," he said. "A permanent seat on the council. Voting rights on all matters. Equal treatment in every way." "No," said Secretary Morris. "No? We are not interested in returning to the council." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Valeris stared at the humans, trying to understand. He was offering them everything they had asked for. Everything they had begged for over 3 centuries, and they were refusing. "I do not understand," he said. Admiral Holloway smiled, but there was no joy in it. "No," she agreed. "You do not. And that is exactly why we will not return." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden below. "We have built something new," she said. "A network of alliances with species who reached out to us directly. Species who acknowledged our worth without being forced to do so. Species who asked for our help as partners, not as servants." She turned back to face him. "The council taught us what we are worth to those who take us for granted. Now we will see what we are worth to those who appreciate us." Valeris opened his mouth to argue, to plead, to demand. But no words came. For the first time in his long life, he had nothing to say. The Galactic Council survived, but only barely. The Vrexian invasion was eventually stopped through desperate measures and terrible sacrifices. Species that had never fought before were forced to learn warfare. Worlds that had relied on human protection for centuries had to defend themselves. The cost was enormous. Millions died who would have lived if human soldiers had stood beside them. The Coloth hegemony was pushed back after 3 more years of grinding conflict. But not before they had swallowed 17 council worlds completely. Those planets and their populations were gone forever, absorbed into the hegemony's cold empire. Trade slowly resumed as new convoy protection systems were developed. It took 15 years before the shipping lanes were as safe as they had been during the human era. Even then, prices remained higher and deliveries remained slower. The council would never be what it once was. Everyone knew this. They just did not like to speak of it. On Earth, humanity built something different. The first new alliance was with the Tesserants. Elder Moss Understone traveled to Earth personally, carrying a small chest made of woven grass. Inside were seeds from the last harvest before the Rexian attack. The seeds of plants that had survived because of Patricia Lane's teaching. He knelt before Secretary Morris in the garden of the Geneva Conference Center and held up the chest with trembling hands. "We were wrong, too. Dismiss you," he said. His fur was pale with age and grief, but his eyes were clear. "We were taught by the council that young species have no wisdom. We know better now." Secretary Morris took the seeds and helped the old Tesseron to his feet. "You are welcome here," she said. "Not as a subordinate species, not as a servant asking for help, but as a friend and equal." Similar delegations arrived from dozens of worlds in the months that followed. Small species that had been overlooked by the council. Peaceful peoples who had suffered under council politics. Scientists and artists and farmers who had worked alongside humans and remembered their kindness. They came to Earth seeking a different kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect and genuine cooperation. One where contributions were acknowledged and sacrifices were honored. Humanity welcomed them all. Admiral Grace Holloway retired from her position after the new Alliance network was established. She had spent her entire adult life serving others. Now she wanted to spend her remaining years at peace. She built a small house in the mountains of Colorado, far from the cities and the politics and the endless demands of diplomacy. The house had a garden where she grew vegetables and a porch where she could watch the sunset. Her granddaughter visited often. The girl was 8 years old, with dark curly hair and eyes full of wonder. She knew nothing of the council or the withdrawal or the wars that had followed. She only knew that her grandmother loved her and that the world was beautiful. Lucas Grant came to visit one evening in early autumn. He was old now, his diplomatic career long behind him. He spent his days teaching history to young students who would grow up in a galaxy very different from the one he had known. He sat on the porch beside Grace and accepted a cup of tea. "The council sent another request," he said. "They want us to reconsider. Again." Grace watched her granddaughter chasing fireflies through the tall grass below. The insects blinked their tiny lights, and the girl laughed with pure delight. "What did you tell them?" "The same thing I always tell them. That humanity is not interested in returning to an organization that only values us when it needs us." Grace nodded. She took a sip of her tea and felt the warmth spread through her old bones. "Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing?" Lucas asked. It was a question that had troubled him for years. So many had died because humanity was not there to protect them. So many had suffered because the council could not function without human support. Grace thought about the question carefully before answering. "We taught them something important," she said finally. "Something they could not have learned any other way. We taught them that kindness given freely is not weakness. That service offered without expectation is not servitude. That when you take people for granted long enough, eventually they stop giving. And if they never learn, if they keep making the same mistakes, Then they keep making the same mistakes. But we are not responsible for their failures anymore. We are only responsible for being true to ourselves. The stars emerged one by one as the sky darkened. Somewhere out there, the Council struggled with problems they had once delegated to humanity. Somewhere out there, new alliances were forming between species who had learned what true partnership meant. The Tesserans had rebuilt their agricultural systems using methods that humans and Tesserans developed together. The crops were different now, better suited to the changing climate. And in every field, small markers honored the human advisors who had first taught them how to grow. Other species had made similar changes. They built monuments to human scientists, soldiers, and doctors. They taught their children about the people who had helped them without asking for anything in return. They remembered. The Council continued to send messages to Earth. They offered seats and voting rights and special privileges. They promised reforms and recognition and respect. Earth continued to decline politely. Secretary Morris passed away 15 years after the withdrawal. She was buried in the garden where she had received Elder Moss Understone and his gift of seeds. Delegations from 27 species attended her funeral. Admiral Holloway lived another 12 years. She watched her granddaughter grow into a young woman who became a teacher. She watched the new alliances strengthen and mature. She watched humanity find its place in the galaxy, not as servants to an ungrateful civilization, but as partners to those who valued them. On the last night of her life, she sat on her porch and looked up at the stars. The same stars she had traveled among for so many years. The same stars that had witnessed humanity's service and humanity's withdrawal. We walked away in silence, she whispered to the darkness. And in that silence, they finally heard us. She closed her eyes and did not open them again. The next morning, her granddaughter found her sitting peacefully in her chair, a small smile on her face. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink dot far across the galaxy. The Galactic Council received news of the old admiral's passing. They debated for 3 days about whether to send condolences. In the end, they did not. And somewhere in the records of the new human alliance, a simple note was added to Grace Holloway's file. She taught us that we were worth more than we knew. She showed us that walking away can be the strongest statement of all. She gave us back our dignity. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity stopped serving those who did not deserve them, and humanity would never forget the woman who had the courage to lead them home.